The gunshots still echoed in Teresa Taylor's ears as she rode back into Sweetwater, her heart heavier than the silver locket that hung around her neck. The townspeople gathered on the main street, their expressions shifting from anticipation to mockery when they saw her return alone. "Where's your husband, Teresa?" called out Elmer Jenkins from the porch of his general store. "Don't tell me he abandoned you out there in Apache territory." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Teresa's chin trembled, but she kept her back straight as an arrow, refusing to let them see her break. 6 months ago, she and Benjamin had set out with such hope, dreams of a new life on the homestead they'd claimed near the mountains. Now she returned covered in dust, alone, and carrying wounds no one could see. "Guess she wasn't woman enough to keep him," someone muttered, loud enough for all to hear. Teresa dismounted, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. The journey had been long, 3 days of hard riding, sleeping with one eye open, jumping at every sound. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. A tall figure stepped from the shadows of the saloon. Dust-covered boots, worn denim, a revolver strapped low on his hip. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, green as spring grass after rain, set in a face weathered by sun and hardship. "She's not alone anymore," the cowboy said, his voice cutting through the murmurs and laughter. The crowd fell silent as he approached, stopping just a few feet from Teresa. "And I reckon you all ought to show some respect to a lady who's ridden through hell and back." Teresa looked up at him, this stranger who'd spoken in her defense. He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of copper in the afternoon sun. "Name's Dawson Sutherland, madam. Let me help you with that horse." It was 1878, and Teresa Taylor's life was about to change forever. The townspeople dispersed, muttering to themselves as Dawson led Teresa's horse toward the livery stable. She followed, her legs stiff from days in the saddle. "You didn't need to do that," she said quietly. "Seems to me I did." Dawson glanced at her. Sweetwater folks can be mighty cruel when they take a notion to it. Teresa brushed dust from her riding skirt. "They have their reasons. No reason good enough to mock a woman in distress." He handed the horse's reins to the stable boy and paid him a coin. "When's the last time you ate, Mrs. Taylor?" "Teresa Taylor." She hesitated. "And I'm not sure. Yesterday, I think." Dawson nodded toward the hotel across the street. "They serve a decent stew at the dining room. Would you allow me to buy you supper? No strings attached, just food and maybe a friendly ear if you feel like talking." Teresa studied him. 6 months in the wilderness had taught her caution, but something in his steady gaze told her she could trust this man. "I'd be grateful, Mr. Sutherland." The hotel dining room was nearly empty at this hour. They sat at a corner table, and Teresa found herself devouring the beef stew and fresh bread with an enthusiasm that might have embarrassed her under different circumstances. "So," Dawson said after she'd eaten half her meal, "want to tell me why those vultures were circling when you rode in?" Teresa set down her spoon. "My husband Benjamin and I came here last fall. We filed a homestead claim about 30 miles north, near Cottonwood Creek." She took a sip of water. "People warned us the land was too close to Apache territory, but Benjamin was stubborn. Said the soil was rich there, perfect for farming. And Benjamin is dead." The word fell from her lips like a stone. 3 weeks ago. Apache raiding party. I buried him myself." Dawson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "Yet you stayed." "For a while. I tried to keep the place running, but—" She looked down at her calloused hands. "A woman alone can't defend a homestead that far out. I held on as long as I could." "That's why they laughed," Dawson said, understanding dawning. "They warned you not to go, and when you came back, they saw it as proof they were right all along." Teresa's voice hardened. "What they don't know is that I'm not giving up. I just came back for supplies. I'm going to sell the homestead, get a fair price for it." Dawson studied her face. "That's dangerous country for anyone traveling alone," much less a woman. Teresa arched an eyebrow. I was going to say someone carrying valuables, he replied with the ghost of a smile. Land sale papers would make you a target for more than just Apache warriors. Their conversation was interrupted by the hotel owner, Mrs. Hollister, who approached with a pot of coffee. Teresa Taylor, as I live and breathe, she said, filling their cups. When I heard you were back in town, I could scarcely believe it. Her gaze flicked to Dawson, curiosity evident in her expression. Mr. Sutherland was kind enough to offer me supper after my journey, Teresa explained. Well, you'll be needing a room for the night, I expect, Mrs. Hollister said. I've got one available, 3rd floor back. Quietest spot in the hotel. Thank you, Teresa said. I'll take it. After Mrs. Hollister departed, Dawson leaned forward. Mrs. Taylor, I'm headed north tomorrow. I've got business near Jackson Pass, which isn't far from Cottonwood Creek. I'd be willing to ride with you, see you safely to your homestead. Teresa studied him warily. Why would you do that?
You don't know me.
Let's just say I've seen what happens to folks who travel alone in that territory, Dawson replied, his expression darkening momentarily. Besides, a man who won't help a lady in distress isn't much of a man at all, according to my mother. A small smile touched Teresa's lips. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. The wisest. Dawson finished his coffee. So, what do you say? We leave at first light, travel together as far as Cottonwood Creek. Teresa considered the offer. Traveling alone had been terrifying, and she knew the return journey would be even more dangerous with the land papers she hoped to obtain. I accept, she said finally, but I insist on paying you something for your trouble. Dawson shook his head. Not necessary. Consider it a neighborly gesture. As they finished their meal, Teresa couldn't help wondering about this mysterious cowboy who had appeared just when she needed help most. His manners suggested education, but his weathered hands spoke of hard work. The gun on his hip was worn from use, not for show. What exactly is your business up north, Mr. Sutherland? She asked as they left the dining room. Dawson hesitated before answering. I'm looking for someone. A man who owes a debt. What kind of debt? His green eyes met hers, and for a moment, she glimpsed something dark and painful there. The kind that can only be paid once, madam. Teresa understood then that Dawson Sutherland carried his own burdens, perhaps heavier than her own. She nodded, knowing better than to press further. I'll be ready at dawn, Mr. Sutherland. Dawson, he corrected. If we're going to be traveling together, might as well use my given name. Dawson, she repeated, and it felt right on her lips. Then you must call me Teresa. That night, in the small but clean hotel room, Teresa removed the silver locket from around her neck. Inside was a small portrait of Benjamin, smiling, his eyes full of dreams and ambition. She touched his face gently. I'm going back one last time, she whispered, to say goodbye properly. Then I'm starting over, just like we always said we would if things went wrong. She didn't know if it was a betrayal to feel relief at the prospect of a fresh start, or to find comfort in the thought of having Dawson's steady presence beside her on the journey ahead. But for the first time since burying her husband, Teresa slept without nightmares. True to his word, Dawson was waiting with the horses at dawn. Teresa emerged from the hotel dressed in practical riding clothes, a split skirt that allowed her to ride astride, a sturdy jacket, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the sun. You travel light, Dawson observed, noting her single saddlebag. I learned the hard way what's necessary and what's just a burden, she replied, securing her bag to the saddle. They rode out of Sweetwater as the town was just beginning to stir. A few early risers watched them go, no doubt already spinning tales about the widow Taylor and her mysterious escort. The journey north took them through vast stretches of desert and scrubland. Dawson proved to be a skilled guide, finding water where Teresa would have seen only barren rock, choosing paths that offered shade during the hottest parts of the day. They made camp the first night in a small canyon. As Dawson built a fire, Teresa noticed how he positioned himself with his back to the rock wall, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "You've spent a lot of time in wild country," she observed, preparing coffee in a small pot. Dawson nodded. "Army scout for 5 years after the war. Learned to read the land, track both men and beasts." "Is that how you know where to find this man you're looking for?" A muscle twitched in Dawson's jaw. "He's not hard to track. Leaves a trail of misery wherever he goes." Teresa handed him a cup of coffee. "This debt. It's personal, isn't it?" Dawson stared into the flames. "He killed my brother 3 years ago in a mining camp near Santa Fe. Shot him in the back over a card game, then disappeared." He took a sip of coffee. "I've been following him ever since. For revenge. For justice." Dawson's voice was quiet but firm. "The law hasn't been able to catch him, but I will." Teresa thought of Benjamin, of the helplessness she'd felt watching him die from the Apache arrow. "I understand," she said softly. "Sometimes justice needs a helping hand." Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain, of burdens carried alone for too long. The second day brought them closer to Apache territory. Twice Dawson spotted signs that made him urge caution, tracks that might have been made by a war party, smoke signals in the distance. They took a longer route to avoid detection, riding through boulder-strewn ravines where the echo of their horses' hooves made Teresa's heart race. As sunset approached, they found a protected spot beneath an overhang. The night was colder here, and Teresa shivered despite the fire. "Here," Dawson said, offering his blanket. "Take this." "I can't take your only blanket," she protested. "I've slept in worse conditions," he assured her. When she still hesitated, he added, "Would make me feel a sight better to know you're not freezing, Teresa." She accepted the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. Its weight was comforting, and it carried his scent: leather, sage, and something uniquely Dawson. "Tell me about your homestead," he said as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Teresa's expression softened. "It's beautiful, especially in spring. The creek runs clear and cold year-round. Wildflowers bloom in colors you wouldn't believe. The soil." She smiled. "Benjamin was right about that. We planted a small garden before." Her voice faltered. "Well, the vegetables came up stronger and faster than anything I'd ever seen. Sounds like a place worth fighting for." "It was," she said quietly, "but not worth dying for. Not anymore." She met his gaze across the fire. "What about you, Dawson? Where do you call home?" He poked at the fire with a stick. "Nowhere particular. Not for a long time." "Before the war?" "Before you became a scout." A distant look came into his eyes. "Texas. Had a small ranch near San Antonio. My parents died when I was young, so it was just me and my brother Daniel raising cattle. We were doing all right until the war came." "You fought for the Confederacy?" Teresa asked cautiously. Dawson shook his head. "Neither side. I couldn't stomach fighting for slavery, and Daniel couldn't bring himself to fight against our neighbors. We just tried to keep the ranch going." His expression darkened. "But war finds you whether you want it or not. Bushwhackers burned us out in '63. We lost everything." "I'm sorry," Teresa said, genuinely moved by his loss. "It was a lifetime ago." Dawson tossed the stick into the fire. "We drifted after that. Worked cattle drives, did some prospecting. Daniel had a gift for cards. I worried it would get him in trouble someday." His voice grew tight. And it did. Teresa reached across the space between them, placing her hand on his arm. "You don't have to tell me if it pains you." His hand covered hers briefly. "Maybe someday. Not tonight." They sat in companionable silence until the fire burned low. As Teresa settled into her bedroll, wrapped in Dawson's blanket, She realized she hadn't thought of Benjamin all day. The realization brought a stab of guilt, quickly followed by a strange sense of liberation. Tomorrow they would reach the homestead. She would gather what was needed, say her goodbyes, and close that chapter of her life. What came after, well, that was still unwritten. The homestead came into view just after noon on the third day. Teresa felt her chest tighten at the sight of the small cabin Benjamin had built with such pride, the garden now overgrown with weeds, the crude wooden cross marking his grave on the hill behind the house. Dawson reined in his horse beside her. "You all right?" Teresa nodded, not trusting her voice. They approached cautiously, Dawson's hand resting near his pistol. But the homestead was as Teresa had left it, abandoned but undisturbed. They dismounted in the yard, and Teresa stood still for a moment, memories washing over her. Here was where Benjamin had spun her round after they'd completed the roof. There was where they'd planted corn and beans, dreaming of their first harvest. "Take all the time you need," Dawson said gently, leading the horses to the small corral. Teresa entered the cabin alone. The interior was dim and musty after weeks of vacancy. She moved through the single room, touching familiar objects: the rocking chair Benjamin had traded for with a passing wagon train, the quilt her mother had made as a wedding gift, the small bookshelf with their few precious volumes. She gathered what she could carry: the deed to the property, her mother's silver hairbrush, a few pieces of clothing. The rest would stay, perhaps to serve another family with dreams of a new beginning. Outside, she found Dawson kneeling beside Benjamin's grave, hat in hand. The sight brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "I didn't know him," Dawson said as she approached, "but anyone who could win the heart of a woman like you must have been a good man." "He was," Teresa said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Stubborn and sometimes foolhardy, but good-hearted. He believed we could make something wonderful here. And now—" She looked around at the land, beautiful but unforgiving. "Now, I believe life is too short to cling to dreams that cost too much. Benjamin would understand." Dawson stood, replacing his hat. "What will you do? After you sell the claim?" "I have a sister in Denver. I thought I might go there at least for a while." She hesitated. "And you? Will you continue your search?" Before Dawson could answer, the sound of approaching horses broke the stillness. He pushed Teresa behind him, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion. "Get to the cabin," he said in a low voice. "Use the back window if you need to escape. Head for the creek and follow it downstream." "I'm not leaving you," she insisted, her heart pounding. "Teresa, I have a rifle inside." 5 riders appeared at the edge of the property. Teresa's blood ran cold as she recognized the lead rider, Victor Rollins, a man who had approached them months ago, offering to buy their claim for a fraction of its worth. Benjamin had thrown him off the property. Well, Rollins called out, a sinister smile spreading across his face. "If it isn't the widow Taylor. We heard you'd abandon this place." "I haven't abandoned anything, Mr. Rollins," Teresa replied coldly. "This is still my property." Rollins' gaze shifted to Dawson. "And who's your friend?" "Replacement husband already." "Name's Sutherland," Dawson said, his voice deceptively calm. "Just escorting Mrs. Taylor to her property." "Mighty neighborly of you." Rollins dismounted, his men following suit. "Thing is, Mrs. Taylor, I've already filed papers claiming this land as abandoned. Judge in Sweetwater's a friend of mine. He'll see things my way." "That's theft," Teresa said, anger replacing her fear. "And it won't stand in court." Rollins laughed. "Who says it'll get to court? Apache territory's dangerous. Accidents happen all the time." Dawson's stance shifted subtly. "You threatening a lady, Rollins?" "Just stating facts." Rollins gestured to his men. "Check the cabin. Take anything valuable." "Hold it," Dawson said, his pistol now openly trained on Rollins. "You boys take one more step, and your boss gets a third eye." The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Teresa slowly reached for the small derringer she kept in her pocket, a gift from Benjamin she'd never thought she'd need to use. Rollins studied Dawson, clearly reassessing the situation. 4 against 1, Cowboy. Those aren't odds I'd bet on. 5. Teresa corrected, the derringer now visible in her hand. And I'm a better shot than you might think. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Rollins' face. Then he threw back his head and laughed. Got yourself a wildcat there, Sutherland. His expression hardened. But this ain't over. That land's going to be mine one way or another. Not today it isn't, Dawson replied evenly. Now mount up and ride out, while you still can. For a moment, Teresa thought Rollins would refuse. His hand hovered near his gun, and she could see the calculation in his eyes. Then, with a curt nod to his men, he retreated. We'll be seeing you again, widow, he called as they mounted. Both of you. They waited, tense and silent, until the riders disappeared from view. Only then did Teresa realize she'd been holding her breath. They'll be back, Dawson said, holstering his weapon. I know. Teresa's hand trembled slightly as she put away the derringer. Rollins has wanted this land from the start. There's a reason. Dawson looked thoughtful. What reason would that be? Teresa led him to the creek that bordered the property. Benjamin discovered this just a week before he died. She pointed to a spot where the water tumbled over rocks, creating a small pool. Look closely. Dawson knelt by the water's edge, his eyes widening as he saw tiny flecks of gold glinting in the sunlight. Gold. Not enough for a major strike, Teresa explained, but Benjamin believed there was more upstream. He was planning to explore further when her voice trailed off. And Rollins knows? Benjamin was excited. Talked too freely in town. She sighed. I think Rollins was watching the place, waiting for a chance. When the Apache attack happened, and I stayed on alone, he probably thought it was just a matter of time before I gave up. Dawson stood, his expression grim. We need to leave before they come back with reinforcements. They worked quickly, gathering Teresa's belongings and the documents for the homestead. As she took one last look around the cabin, Teresa felt a strange sense of closure. Benjamin's dreams had died with him, but perhaps her new ones were just beginning. They rode hard until nightfall, taking a different route than the one they'd used coming in. Dawson led them through a narrow canyon, following what appeared to be a dry stream bed. Rollins won't know this path, he explained. Old Apache trail. Most white folks avoid it. How do you know it? A smile touched his lips. Told you I was a scout. Learned from a Chiricahua guide. Smart man. Taught me more than just trails. They made camp in a hidden grove, not risking a fire. In the moonlight, Teresa studied Dawson's profile as he kept watch. The strength in his features was matched by a gentleness she hadn't initially recognized. You never answered my question, she said softly. About what you'll do after finding the man you're looking for. Dawson was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Haven't thought that far ahead, he admitted finally. Been chasing so long. Sometimes I fear there won't be anything left of me when it's done. There will be, Teresa said with certainty. A man like you is too much to offer the world to be consumed by vengeance. He turned to her then, his expression unreadable in the dim light. And what makes you so sure of that, Teresa Taylor? Because I see you, she said simply. Not just the tracker or the gunman, but the man who defends strangers, who respects the dead, who offers his blanket to keep someone else warm. Dawson moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. And what if that's not enough? What if I've been in the wilderness too long to find my way back? Teresa reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. Then you find someone to guide you home. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a question being asked and answered. Then it deepened, awakening feelings Teresa had thought buried along with her husband. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. "I didn't expect this," Dawson murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "Nor did I," Teresa admitted. "It feels too soon, and yet." "And yet," he agreed, understanding in his eyes. They spent the night wrapped in each other's arms, finding comfort and connection beneath the vast canopy of stars. No promises were made, no declarations offered. It was enough, for now, to have found each other in the wilderness. Morning brought clarity and decisions. As they prepared to continue their journey, Teresa broached the subject that had been on her mind. "Rollins won't stop," she said. "He'll try to claim I abandoned the homestead, maybe even forge documents saying I sold it to him." Dawson nodded. "Likely so." "I need to file a formal claim with the land office in Prescott," she continued, "and report Rollins' threats to the federal marshal there." "That's a good plan," Dawson agreed. "But Prescott's a 5-day ride west of here." Teresa met his gaze steadily. "I know. And it's not on your way if you're still hunting your brother's killer." Understanding dawned in Dawson's eyes. "You're asking me to choose." "I'm asking you to consider that there might be more than one path to justice," she corrected gently, "and that revenge and healing can't walk the same road." Dawson was silent for a long moment, his internal struggle evident in his expression. "The man I'm hunting, Jack Blackmore, he's done more than kill my brother. He's robbed stagecoaches, murdered at least 3 other men that I know of, letting him go free." "I'm not suggesting that," Teresa said. "But perhaps there's a way to bring him to proper justice, without sacrificing yourself in the process." She took his hands in hers. "Come with me to Prescott. We'll speak to the marshal there about both Rollins and Blackmore. Let the law handle it. And if they can't, or won't, then at least you'll have tried. And you won't be alone anymore when you make your next decision." The promise in those words hung between them, fragile but real. Dawson closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "To Prescott, then. Together." They altered their course, heading west instead of south. The journey was not without challenges. A rattlesnake spooked Teresa's horse, sending her tumbling to the ground. They crossed paths with a small band of Apaches who, fortunately, were more curious than hostile. Provisions ran low, forcing them to hunt and forage. Through it all, the connection between them deepened. Teresa shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, of her dreams beyond being a farmer's wife. Dawson spoke of his time as a scout, of the beauty and terror of the untamed territories, of the brother whose memory he carried like a physical weight. At night, beneath blankets and stars, they explored each other with increasing intimacy, finding in physical connection an echo of their growing emotional bond. On the 4th day, as they crested a hill overlooking a vast expanse of prairie, Dawson suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. "What is it?" Teresa asked, scanning the horizon. "Riders," he said tersely, "coming fast from the east." Teresa felt a chill of foreboding. "Rollins? Can't tell yet. But whoever they are, they're pushing hard." Dawson's eyes narrowed as he studied the approaching dust cloud. 5, maybe 6 riders. "What do we do?" He pointed to a rocky outcropping about half a mile ahead. "Make for those rocks. We'll have better position there if it comes to trouble." They urged their horses forward, reaching the outcropping just as the riders came close enough to identify. Teresa's heart sank as she recognized Rollins at the lead, his face set in grim determination. "It's him," she confirmed unnecessarily. Dawson helped her dismount and led the horses behind the largest boulder. "Stay low," he instructed, checking his pistol. "If shooting starts, get as far back in these rocks as you can." "I can fight," Teresa insisted, retrieving her derringer. "I won't hide while you face them alone." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't expect you to." His expression sobered. "But Teresa, if things go badly, promise you'll run. Get to Prescott. Find the marshal." Before she could respond, Rollins' voice called out from below. Sutherland. Taylor. We know you're up there. Dawson peered cautiously around the boulder. What do you want, Rollins? Just a conversation. Rollins shouted back. About that property and how we might come to an arrangement. No need for arrangements, Dawson replied. The lady's land is her own. She'll be filing proper papers in Prescott. Laughter drifted up from Rollins and his men. That's so? Well, might interest you to know I've already filed papers in Sweetwater. Judge Holden signed them yesterday. That land's legally mine now. Teresa's blood boiled. He's lying, she hissed. He can't have legal claim. Of course he's lying, Dawson agreed. But he's got 5 guns backing up his lie. Teresa peered around the rock, assessing their situation. Rollins and his men had spread out at the base of the outcropping, effectively cutting off any escape route. What's it going to be? Rollins called. You coming down to talk? Or do we need to come up and get you? Dawson turned to Teresa, his expression grave. I need to draw them away from you. No, she said firmly. We stick together. Teresa. Their debate was cut short by a new sound approaching hoofbeats from the west, moving fast. Both Dawson and Teresa looked up in alarm to see 3 riders approaching at a gallop. More of Rollins' men? Teresa whispered. Dawson shook his head, a strange expression crossing his face. No. That's a U.S. Marshal's badge on the lead rider. Indeed, as the newcomers drew closer, Teresa could make out the glint of a silver star on the chest of the first rider. The 3 men rode directly to where Rollins and his gang waited, cutting off any potential confrontation. What's happening here, gentlemen? The marshal called out, his voice carrying clearly to where Teresa and Dawson watched. Private business, Marshal, Rollins replied, his tone noticeably less confident. Nothing that concerns the law. 6 armed men surrounding 2 travelers looks mighty concerning to me, the marshal observed dryly. Especially when one of those travelers is a woman. Dawson stood, keeping his hand near his gun but making himself visible. Marshal. Up here. The lawman looked up, touching his hat in acknowledgement. You folks all right? We're fine, Dawson called back. But these men have been threatening Mrs. Taylor and attempting to steal her homestead claim. The marshal dismounted, his deputies following suit. Up close, Teresa could see he was an older man, his beard streaked with gray, but his bearing suggested he was still formidable. That true, Rollins? He asked. Rollins shifted uncomfortably. Just a misunderstanding about property lines, Marshal Jennings. Nothing more. Aha! The marshal's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word. And these misunderstandings usually require 6 armed men to resolve. We were concerned for our safety, Rollins protested. Sutherland up, there's a known gunman. Marshal Jennings laughed outright at that. Son, I've known Dawson Sutherland for going on 10 years, and while he's handy with a pistol, he's no gunman. He's been working with the territorial government as a special deputy for the last 3 years. Teresa turned to Dawson in astonishment. A deputy? Dawson had the grace to look sheepish. It's complicated. Below, the marshal was continuing. Now, I suggest you boys turn around and head back to wherever you came from. And Rollins, if I hear about any more misunderstandings involving the Taylor homestead, you'll be explaining yourself to a federal judge. Clear? Rollins' face darkened with anger, but he was clearly unwilling to challenge the marshal. With a curt nod to his men, he mounted up and rode off, throwing one last venomous look toward the outcropping. Once Rollins and his gang were out of sight, Dawson and Teresa descended to meet the marshal. Didn't expect to see you out this way, Dawson, Marshal Jennings said, clasping Dawson's hand warmly. Likewise, sir. You're a long way from your usual territory. Following up on reports of a gang working these parts. The marshal's keen eyes shifted to Teresa. You must be Mrs. Taylor. I've heard about your situation. You have? Teresa asked in surprise. Word travels. The marshal turned back to Dawson. Speaking of which, got some news you might be interested in. Jack Blackmore was captured 3 days ago near Tucson. Shot up a saloon, killed a man. Territorial rangers got him trying to cross into Mexico. Teresa felt Dawson go completely still beside her. He's in custody, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Locked up tight in Yuma prison, the marshal confirmed. They're holding him for trial, but with multiple murder charges. He won't see daylight again. A range of emotions crossed Dawson's face: disbelief, relief, and something that looked almost like loss. Teresa understood after years of pursuit. To have his purpose suddenly fulfilled by someone else must be disorienting. That's good news, Dawson said finally. Thank you for telling me. The marshal nodded, seeming to understand the complexity of Dawson's reaction. We're headed to Prescott. You folks want to ride with us? Safer in numbers. Teresa looked at Dawson, who nodded slowly, still processing the news about his brother's killer. We'd appreciate that, Marshal, she answered. We have business at the land office there. As they prepared to ride out, Teresa found a moment alone with Dawson. Are you all right? She asked gently. He looked at her, his green eyes troubled. I don't know. For so long, finding Blackmore was all I had. All I was. His hand found hers. Now I'm not sure who I am anymore. Teresa squeezed his hand. I know who you are, Dawson Sutherland. You're the man who stood up for me when everyone else laughed. You're the man who helped me face my past and find courage for my future. She smiled. And if you'll let me, I'd like to help you discover who you can be now that your burden's been lifted. Something shifted in his expression, the shadow that had haunted him since she'd first met him beginning to recede. I'd like that, he said softly. Very much. They rode toward Prescott with the marshal and his deputies, the future spreading before them like the vast western horizon full of promise, adventure, and the possibility of love reborn in unexpected circumstances. And as Teresa looked at Dawson riding beside her, she knew that the townspeople of Sweetwater had been wrong to laugh when she returned alone. For she had found someone far more precious than what she had lost. She had found a partner, a protector, a man who saw her strength and matched it with his own. She was not alone anymore, and neither was he.